the opening song in my show says that we live in a political world. Love ain't have no place. But our first guest this afternoon is Toback, who's from the Workers' Circle, which I always thought was the Workmen's Circle, but maybe there's been a non-sexist change in the name over the years. And it's an organization that's built on love, right? It's built on love. It's built on the concept of social justice coming from a Jewish perspective. And just in preparing for this show, I actually didn't realize that some of the programs that you do, which are things that I've known about since I was a kid, are part of Workers' Circle, like Camp Kinderland, which is a camp in the country that mostly Jewish kids go to, and they learn Jewish culture from a very left perspective. I guess it may have been started by members of the Communist Party back in the day, but anyway, the politics are similar. Anne's making faces at me. Anyway, Anne, welcome to Advocating for Justice.
Thank you.
So tell people who don't know, what is Workers' Circle?
Okay, well, first, I want to thank you on behalf of the Workers' Circle and New Yorkers everywhere, myself included, for helping to keep this amazing voice of the people on the air. So important. WBAI's voice and message and keeping us all informed. It couldn't be more important today. So I want to thank you for all of your efforts and the efforts of everyone here to keep that voice loud and proud. And I also need a small correction to say our camp is Camp Kindering. Although you're more than half right, because Camp Kinderland was also founded as a Workers' Circle camp, then Workmen's Circle. But the two camps split up. That being said, we're all friends now. Friendship is definitely something that's very core in our values. And Camp Kinderland became a communist camp. It started off a Workers' Circle camp, and the Workers' Circle was a socialist organization. So in the 20s, the socialists and the communists divided. But that's long time history.
Now we all support Bernie.
Well, we're a 501c3, but we
That's
are
right.
definitely...
I don't support Bernie on the air either.
We're definitely a progressive organization, and we support holding our elected officials accountable for the values of our members and people of good conscience everywhere. And that's something we can all stand behind. But if I could now jump ahead 120 years later, because we're celebrating our 120th year of life and activism today. The Workers' Circle today is a progressive social justice organization, and we power Jewish identity through Jewish cultural engagement, Yiddish language learning. I'm proud to tell you that we're the largest Yiddish language program in the world. We teach it in over 25 countries in real time online and in our headquarters in Manhattan. We also have education programs for children and adults, and everything we do is about engaging people and activating them on social justice activism through a Jewish lens.
So what does it mean to look at social activism through a Jewish lens?
It's looking at our traditions of activism in the Jewish world. For the Workers' Circle, we really look at the last 120, 200 years of activism very much in the viewpoints of our founders, who were immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Russia, Poland, Lithuania. Many of them were part of the Jewish Labor Bund, which was a precursor to the United States labor movement. It was a Jewish labor campaign, if you will, but it was a movement to connect workers with the rights to collective engagement. And they were very involved in Lithuania, Poland, Russia. It really swept through Eastern Europe. And then they came here in the early 1900s, many in reaction to the growing waves of pogroms, violence against Jews. and they land in the United States and quickly find that some of the same battles for worker rights are very much in the forefront of what's needed here in the United States. So they become labor activists. And the Workers' Circle stood as their community home and worked with the union movement to organize people and fight for those rights that this growing immigrant population so desperately needed.
But how is it, so when one does work these days from a Jewish perspective, it could be fairly controversial in this world what that means, right? Unfortunately. But what does it mean to you guys?
For us, it means continuing our traditions, fighting for fairness, for justice for all. It's not enough for us. And we can find plenty of text-based notes about this. If you look at historic Jewish texts from the Talmud to the Torah and to many tracts, you'll find references to, for example, treating workers fairly, making sure fair compensation, not abusing your neighbors. There's some really amazing historic writings of how one treats the rest of the world. But it's also, I think, in the traditions that have been embraced by a progressive Jewish community for centuries now. Traditions like the labor movement, worker rights. And we look very closely to those traditions as part of our Jewish identity and our Jewish lens. We get inspiration from the way back forebearers, and we get real inspiration from the immigrants who landed in Ellis Island from Lithuania and Poland and had to take on fights that we're yet again finding so important today.
So what are what kind of programs do you have these days?
So one of our big programs today is something we call Youth Stand Up for Justice, where we take a program into local synagogues, sometimes local schools, and community centers, both Jewish and sometimes very secular, not Jewish based. And we teach teens about the history of activism, really dating it back to the early 1900s when our first wave of Eastern European Jewish immigrants came here. And we teach them that so many of the rights that we enjoy today as U.S. citizens, we can find history in young teen activists fighting for those rights. And then we take them forward very quickly to today, where we have amazing examples of young teens who are changing the world. And we say to them, you too can change the world. Age is a number. You have so much power in creating meaningful coalitions and strategies, and we give them some tools so that for them, activism becomes more than just showing up at a demonstration. It becomes thinking about what changes they want to bring into effect and figuring out means to actually make that change, be it connecting with elected officials or building broad groups of people to share in their demands or educating people on the street as to where injustice stands and where they feel solutions may be. So Youth Stand Up for Justice is one of our wonderful signature programs. We do many other things. Should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Go ahead.
We also work in coalition with other Jewish organizations and immigrant organizations to help resource campaigns today. In the last year, the Workers' Circle was a significant organizer for the Green Light New York campaign. And we went out in the Jewish community and brought a coalition of Jewish organizations together in support of that critical legislation in New York, which allowed undocumented immigrants the ability to obtain access to a driver's license. Today, we're very involved in the efforts to educate the public about the racist wealth test, which is the public charge rule, which today went into effect after a Supreme Court decision allowed the Trump administration to put these new rules that are essentially, they're not even thinly veiled. They're rules that are intended to keep poor people, keep people without wealth, to keep people of color out of our country. People who may be on our door, here at our doors, asking for it, pleading for entry because their lives are very much in danger. And we're saying no, unless you have significant wealth that the majority of our country don't even have, unless you can show us that we don't have to invest in your transition into a productive citizenship at all, we're really not interested in welcoming you here or giving you access to our country.
Do you find that a lot of the programs that you do are oriented towards immigrants, the poor, non-Jewish poor?
It's interesting. It's probably a lot of the activism that we're doing today is targeted at immigrants. And I wouldn't say the non-Jewish poor, because something we know that maybe is not of common knowledge is a significant number of Jews in the United States are themselves in need of assistance. Jews are not, they're not outside of the wealth test themselves today. I mean, there are Jews who are at the poverty line, thousands and thousands. There are Jewish children who are in need of support. So while we as a people are no longer, have become members of the United States, mostly citizens, and there is a significant level of success, there's still people in need. The demographics of the Jewish community certainly reflect other demographics too. When you look at poverty amongst the Jewish community, it exists and is significant. So when we're helping the poor, we're actually helping our own community alongside other communities.
So one of the reasons I ask is because I know that in the beginning, clearly my grandfather and grandmother and grandfather, they all came over around 1900. So
right.
They were part of that wave. They were immigrants. They called it Russia, but they really were from, at least two of them were from the Kiev area,
yes.
which they called Russia in those days. Now we all know that it's part of Ukraine.
Right.
And they were very poor. They were dirt poor. In fact, my grandfather came 15 years before his wife did so that he could save up enough money to bring his family to the United States, and only got her out through the midst of the Russian Revolution through luck. And of course, Jews played a big role in the trade union movement, the birth of the trade union movement in the United States, particularly in the garment industry, where poor garment workers were largely Jewish, and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union were led by Jews and populated by Jews, something that has changed a lot over the years. So the focus of a lot of Jewish activism tends to be non-Jews, and unfortunately also tends to get mixed up with the whole question of Israel and all of that issue raises. And just for a moment, this is advocating for justice on WBAI 99.5 FM, and we're talking to Ann Toback from Workers Circle. When you work with youth, the work with youth, which I think is critically important, are you working just with Jewish youth, or are you working with young people in general?
Many of our programs are targeted at Jewish youth, but we also have programs that are designed to connect with young people in general, because we believe that the answers to some of the greatest problems we're facing is to cross over any dividing lines and create united community, united coalition, especially when we look at issues like anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, anti-immigrant. We know that the way to overcome the bigotry and hate we are facing is to create strong, united fronts. And so we encourage children who are part of our programs who identify Jewishly. Nowadays, there's a strong, many people identify Jewishly and something else when it comes to it. Many come from mixed marriages, or their parents identify in many different ways. So I do want to mention that too. But we thoughtfully find partners from other defined communities and create bridges. So our kids, for example, every year take a civil rights trip. This year, we're planning to go to Memphis. Last year, we went to Virginia and, in fact, with a visit to Charlottesville and D.C. and Maryland. And we've done, in partnership with other groups, African-American, groups and Muslim groups, we find programs where the kids can partner today and tomorrow and after that, because we know that that's ultimately going to help change the dynamic of hate out there, is if we replace it by, strong friendships.
So how much do you find anti-Semitism to be a problem that you have to confront it with your organization while you're helping others? How much do you deal with the whole issue of anti-Semitism, which is a growing problem?
It's a growing problem around us, and the kids we're working with, the kids in our programs, are concerned and frightened, and there's a lot of language out there that's very, very scary. So we work with our kids both to tell them that we're here to protect them. I mean, that's the first thing for anybody who works with children, parents, is to assure your kids that we're here to keep them safe. It's not a guarantee, unfortunately, today, and we recognize, as we talk, we have to recognize that. But in our relationships with young people, what's so important is that we assure them that our first priority is that they be safe and secure, and we're doing everything we can to make that happen. After that, there are tactics we teach them, from speaking up, really encouraging them that we're a safe place for them to speak up when they're worried, hearing them, not dictating how they should feel, and giving them ideas about what to do if they feel unsafe, from going into a store to connecting with others to even making eye contact with people if they're feeling concerned. So we do all of that. And then we certainly talk to them about the roots of hate and how we've successfully overcome them before and where our challenges are today. And education, education and community, and really bringing different groups face to face just helps bring that forward. But anti-Semitism has to be a concern of ours, and is.
How do you, as a 501c3, deal with something like the public charge rule, which is I don't know if it's other than his border wall garbage that the Supreme Court has, after years and years of courts ruling that the expenditure of all this money was illegal and the cages were illegal, the Trump administration somehow has got rulings that allow them to go ahead and at least symbolically build a couple of 100 miles of wall before the election. But this is a major change in the law that's going to say you're not welcome in this country unless you can show that you're going to be able to have a job.
It is, and
how do you fight that as a 501c3?
Well, we're actually, as a 501c3, more than welcome to speak to we can speak to issues. We do not endorse any candidates, but we can comment on issues that impact us significantly. And as a people, as citizens of the United States, as an organization ourselves founded by immigrants, we can speak to issues today, such as this racist wealth test that's the public charge rule, and call it out for what it is, and object to it, and demand that our country stand for something better than this. And I'd like to bring up here that in 1930, the last time we saw a rule of this nature, a wealth test, it was designed by then President Hoover to keep out Eastern European Jews as Hitler took power and Nazism swept Eastern Europe. And it ultimately was part of the reason that millions of Jews found themselves trapped in Eastern Europe, unable to gain access to countries like the United States because they didn't have the wealth to get into this country. So that's 75 years ago today, the period of the Holocaust was reaching an end, finally. Not so long ago, the impact of what happened in 1930 chills us all now and certainly resonates with the Workers' Circle. And today we're here to fight in the name of our ancestors and say, not again. We're not going to be quiet.
So how does, other than the program with kids, what other kind of programs does Workers' Circle have for non-kids, older persons?
We organize. We have these campaigns are open to adults as well. When we have tomorrow morning, we have public advocate Jimani Williams coming into our headquarters at 247 West 37th Street and at 8:30 a.m., a free program where he's going to talk to us about issues that are important to us in New York City. And he's going to speak to issues like public charge and how that impacts us as New Yorkers. And he's going to speak to issues local and national that affect us all. We call it Breakfast with Champions. We've had last person who was with us was the State Attorney General Tish James, another champion. We have campaigns. People, if they go to circle.org or check us out on Facebook, are going to see a lot about public charge. And also, we've been doing a lot of work with the Coalition of Immokalee workers, farm workers, who are fighting for a fair food agreement. Right now, they're fighting Wendy's in particular. Another program I definitely want to mention is this year we're taking our third annual trip to Poland and Lithuania in the footsteps of the Jewish Labor Bund. We have a 10-day trip in May, starting on May 17th through 26th, that starts in Vilnius, the birthplace of the Jewish Labor Bund. And we track 1,000 years of Jewish history, of resistance, of activism, and high cultural heritage. So we take a group of adults, sometimes some younger people come along on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to literally reconnect with where we come from and understand how so much of that impacts who we are today.
So how does somebody who wants to get involved? We're running out of time.
A great way is to find us on Facebook, Workers' Circle. And another way is to go to circle.org, which is our homepage, our webpage, and look for us. We're also on Twitter and Instagram. But I think the homepage at circle.org and Facebook are great places. And maybe some people listening will stop by our headquarters,
which is at
247 West 37th Street in the Garment District, a union wall-to-wall building today, and it's on the 5th floor. And people should really feel free to stop by tomorrow to meet Jimani Williams.
So that so tomorrow Jimani is at what's the address again? 247
West 37th Street, 5th floor at 8:30 a.m. And there'll be free breakfast for everyone in addition.
And do you have those programs, on the last, whatever tomorrow is, Tuesday of every month?
No, they come through monthly and very often multiple programs per month. So keeping an eye on our Facebook page and on our circle.org page are all very helpful, and because we have all sorts of great things coming, including a program on Jews and the history of comic books. And so much else. So it's worth seeing. There's lots of culture. There's lots of Yiddish. And if you're looking for a Yiddish language program, we have a program for you. We teach more of it than anyone else in the world.
You know, it's interesting. We should do a whole show talking about Yiddish and the importance of the survival of a language that very few people speak anymore. I was thinking about that the other day because when I was a kid, a lot of my relatives, the Yiddish was their first language. And
yes. Mine too. By the way, we share a lot of, I think, similarities in our ancestors. My grandparents came from Kiev, outside Kiev as well, but it was Russia in those days. Something we talk about on our trip, how the borders have changed so much in the last 200 years. I once met someone on one of our trips who had lived in 5 countries and had never moved once. So borders change, cultural identity, political, the activist history, it's all very resonant, and it helps us define who we are today.
So thank you so much, Anne, for coming.
Thank you.
I'd like to, have you on again and make sure that, I'm on your list. I got 2 calls today about Giovanni Williams tomorrow, so I'm going to make sure that
that
I
would
show
be
up
wonderful. And thank you for having me today. And I look to continuing the conversation in English, but maybe with some Yiddish sprinkled in.
And I get to play a little disc jockey on this show. I do 2 songs a show. And so I was looking for something by a Jew. First, I was going to put some klezmer music on, but I decided to do "Democracy Is Coming" by Leonard Cohen.
That's
as a fit song by a Jewish
by
hero.
A true believer in our cause, in our progressive.
We're going to
cause.
listen to some Leonard Cohen. Thank you.